I stood outside my childhood home on Christmas Eve, wearing a thrift store coat and carrying a fake, damaged purse. My name is Kayla, and beneath the image of failure my family sees lies a billion-dollar secret. The San Francisco fog rolled in, cold and unforgiving, much like the people waiting for me on the other side of that heavy oak door. Inside, my family was busy celebrating my sister Abigail's promotion to CEO of a mid-tier fashion brand with a $1.2 million salary. They had invited me specifically to witness this triumph and feel ashamed of my supposed failures, a calculated annual ritual of degradation. What they didn't know is that I own Novacore Industries, a global technology powerhouse with a market valuation of $2.8 billion. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to conduct a final audit of their humanity. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The front door opened before I could even raise my hand to knock, revealing my mother, Melanie, in her finest holiday silk. Her smile was a practiced thing, the kind of professional courtesy usually reserved for distant relatives you intend to overcharge or unwelcome neighbors you want to impress. "Kayla, you actually made it," she said, stepping aside just enough to let me pass, but pointedly offering no hug, no warmth, not even a simple welcome home. "Everyone is already in the living room. Abigail just arrived from the office, and the atmosphere is electric." I shuffled inside, adjusting my deliberately worn coat and clutching my shabby purse. The house smelled of expensive cinnamon candles and $300 bottles of wine, with fresh, thick garland draped along the mahogany banister. As I entered the living room, the warm buzz of extended family voices quieted instantly. It was as if a glitch had occurred in their perfect, high-end reality. My Uncle Gary called out from his leather recliner, barely glancing up from his tablet. "Look who finally decided to show up. We were starting to think you couldn't get time off from that dusty little book cafe downtown." His voice carried that familiar edge, the kind of verbal sandpaper he had been using to rub my spirit raw for decades. Abigail swept into the center of the room, her presence announced by the sharp click of her designer heels against the polished hardwood. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 5 times my supposed monthly rent. Her engagement ring caught the light of the crystal chandelier, sending sharp, blinding sparkles across the walls. "Oh, Kayla, I'm surprised you came," she said, her voice dripping with a patronizing sweetness that felt like poison. "I know family gatherings aren't really your thing since you started, well, since you settled into your current lifestyle." "I wouldn't miss celebrating your success," I replied quietly, maintaining my defeated demeanor. I played the part of the broken, naive girl perfectly, a role they had written for me years ago. "Congratulations on the CEO position, Abigail." Her smile turned sharp, like a razor blade hidden in a velvet glove. "Thank you, Kayla. It's amazing what happens when you set real goals and actually work toward them. Gary and Melanie are so proud. Brandon and I are already looking at houses in the executive neighborhood. We need something with at least 5 bedrooms and separate guest quarters." The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, cold and indifferent. They discussed Abigail's corporate achievements and Gary's latest investment wins as if I were part of the furniture. When someone occasionally directed a question my way, it was always with that tone of obligatory politeness that masks a deep, systemic contempt. Melanie began to arrange appetizers on the coffee table, her movements precise and clinical. "Abigail's success really highlights how far behind you've fallen, Kayla. We've all been talking, and we've decided it's time for some tough love." Then came the moment they had been rehearsing all evening. Melanie pulled a thick legal document from a silver tray. "We know you're struggling to make ends meet in that cramped studio apartment," she said. "So, we've put together a package to help you get on your feet. We're willing to give you $10,000 in immediate cash. No strings attached." I looked at the paper and realized it was a waiver, an agreement to officially forfeit my inheritance rights to our grandmother's historic home in the Arts District. I clutched my gift bag, forcing a few well-timed tears into my eyes to complete the performance. "That's incredibly generous," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." Gary nodded emphatically from his chair. "Accept the reality, Kayla. You're 32 years old with nothing to show for it. No career, no assets, no future. Abigail is offering you a lifeline. It's time to stop drifting and accept help from people who actually know how to manage a life. I looked at the waiver, then at their expectant, greedy faces. In their minds, they were the masters of the universe, and I was just a liability they were finally writing off the books. They had no idea that the house they were so desperate to steal was already the legal headquarters of my multi-billion-dollar empire. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my career. I simply took the expensive fountain pen Gary offered, scrawled my signature on the waiver, and walked out of the house into the biting San Francisco night. I didn't cry, and I didn't look back to see them celebrating their $10,000 victory. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut, the persona of the broken, naive girl vanished. I walked toward my car, a nondescript vehicle parked 3 blocks away, feeling nothing but a sharp, clinical clarity. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrawn for years, and tonight, the account was finally closed. This wasn't a breakdown. This was accounting. People often ask why someone with my resources would endure such humiliation for so long. They don't understand the invisible chain of the survivor. When you grow up in an environment where your worth is constantly negotiated, you learn to survive by building a cage around your heart. For 4 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. I had been paying their property taxes, $12,000 a year, totaling $48,000, through a series of shell companies just to keep Gary from realizing he was on the verge of foreclosure. I was a survivor living in a house of mirrors, waiting for one of them to show a single shred of genuine love that wasn't tied to a bank balance. The signature on that waiver was my final payment. I had officially bought my freedom. As I sat in the driver's seat, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of cold facts and lethal numbers. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask why. I just started clicking cancel. I called Marcus, my head of operations at Nova Corps. Initiate Protocol 0 for the San Francisco subsidiary, I told him. My voice was calm, factual, and lethal. We are reclaiming our assets immediately. Abigail's entire fashion empire was built on a foundation I had secretly provided. The servers that ran her e-commerce platform and stored her proprietary designs were located in the basement of our grandmother's house, a space I had leased to her firm for $1 a year under an anonymous contract. More importantly, her recent expansion was funded by an angel investor she had never met. That investor was me. I had funneled $750,000 into her brand because I wanted to see if success would make her kind. It only made her a predator. Now, it was time to rebalance the sheet. I authorized the immediate withdrawal of all Nova Corps investment funds from her brand. I also gave the order to shut down the private server farm in the Arts District house. In 60 seconds, Abigail's $1.2 million career would be nothing more than a collection of broken links and empty bank accounts. She had spent years making me feel like a shadow in her world, but she was about to learn that without the light I provided, her world didn't exist. The subscription to my Mercy had just expired, and I was footing the bill for her reality check. The fallout was instantaneous. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Abigail's digital storefront was a graveyard of 404 errors. The $750,000 I had pulled back didn't just leave a hole in her budget, it triggered a series of automated clauses in her other contracts. When the anchor of my investment disappeared, her entire financial structure became unstable. I watched it all from my actual office, a high-security space that smelled of ozone and expensive espresso, miles away from the cinnamon-scented lies of my parents' house. My phone started vibrating on the desk at 3:15. Melanie. I didn't answer. I watched it glow, a silent witness to her desperation. Then came the text messages, a frantic stream of toxic projection. Kayla, what did you do? Abigail's system is down, and her investors have vanished. She is hysterical. I knew having you there tonight was a mistake. Your failure energy is infectious. Call us right now. I didn't reply. I just screenshotted the messages and added them to a new file labeled evidence. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I was performing a biopsy on my family's character, and the results were malignant. By dawn, Melanie had moved the attack to social media. She posted a photo of the family, minus me, smiling in front of the Christmas tree. The caption read, "Some people forget the hands that fed them and the sacrifices made for their future." It's heartbreaking when jealousy turns a child against their own blood. Praying for my eldest to find her way and stop trying to bring others down to her level. Abigail commented under the post within minutes, "It's okay, Mom. Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed. I won't let her bitterness ruin my career. I'll rebuild, with or without her support." I stared at the screen, marveling at the sheer density of their delusion. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me for 20 years. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Gary's call came through at 7 a.m. He was less frantic and more demanding. "Kayla, I don't know what kind of tech games you think you're playing, but you need to fix this. We helped you get that bookstore job. We've kept a roof over your head. If you've done anything to interfere with Abigail's servers, you are finished in this family. Do you hear me? I'll make sure you never work again." I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. My reflection in the glass didn't look like a broken girl anymore. It looked like the woman who controlled the infrastructure of their lives. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why he was threatening me after I just signed away my inheritance. I simply opened my laptop and authorized the next phase. If they wanted to talk about consequences, I was happy to provide a full report. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't engage with the social media noise. I simply forwarded every threat, every scream, and every toxic text to Sarah Chan, my executive coordinator, and our head of legal. By 9 a.m., the personal phase of this audit was over. We were moving into professional liquidation. My compassion had reached its limit, and the debt of honor they thought I owed had been cancelled by their own cruelty. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family falling apart. It was a poorly managed business being restructured. My lawyer, a woman named Grace who had been with NovaCore since we were worth $500,000, called me with the efficiency of a precision instrument. "Everything is ready, Kayla," she said. Her voice was steady, unemotional, exactly the tone I needed. "The property at 327 Oak Street is officially registered under our holding company, NovaCore Real Estate. The server farm Abigail installed in the basement is a direct violation of the residential zoning permit. More importantly, the unauthorized commercial use of the utility lines to support her fashion platform gives us the legal right to terminate the current occupancy immediately." I gave her the green light. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask if we could give them more time. I only felt the satisfaction of a balanced ledger. By noon, a professional process server was walking up the polished driveway of our grandmother's house, the very house Gary and Melanie had just tricked me into forfeiting, for $10,000. He handed Gary a thick manila envelope containing a formal 48-hour eviction notice. The timer had started, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the stopwatch. The grounds for the eviction weren't personal. They were technical, clinical, and lethal. The notice cited the unauthorized installation of high-capacity server racks and the illegal rerouting of industrial-grade electrical power. Because the property was legally owned by NovaCore Industries, and because the occupants had compromised the building's safety protocols, they were being ordered to vacate the premises by 2 p.m. on December 26. My family was about to discover that the black sheep they had marginalized for years didn't just have a bookstore job. She had a legal team with a multi-million-dollar retainer. My phone lit up again, but the caller ID showed a different kind of desperation this time. It was Abigail. I finally picked up, leaning back in my chair at NovaCore headquarters. "Kayla, tell me this is a joke," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a fear I had never heard before. "Some corporate lawyer just served Gary with an eviction notice. They're saying a company called NovaCore owns the house. They're saying we have 48 hours to get out. You have to call them. You have to tell them who we are." I listened to her panic for 3 seconds. The silence on my end was heavy. I don't know what to tell you, Abigail, I said, my voice as cold as the San Francisco fog. I don't own the house anymore. I signed it away to you for $10,000, remember? You're the one with the CEO title and the $1.2 million salary. Surely a successful executive like you can handle a little real estate dispute. But they're closing the house, she cried. My servers are in that basement. My entire inventory system is tied to those racks. If NovaCore shuts us out, my company is finished. I'm finished. Then I suppose you should have spent less time mocking my bookstore job and more time reading the fine print on your lease, I said. I ended the call before she could respond. I didn't feel a sunrise of joy. I felt a sunrise of facts. They were once in a position of power, but they were about to learn that power is a subscription, and I had just canceled theirs. Grace called me at 4 p.m. on Christmas Day. Her voice had a sharp, metallic edge that usually meant she had found the smoking gun. While my family was likely tearing their hair out over an eviction notice and a failing fashion empire, my legal team had been performing a forensic deep dive into our family records. This wasn't an investigation into hurt feelings. It was an audit of a crime. Grace didn't start with a greeting. She started with a fact. Kayla, we just finished the cross-reference on the probate records from 5 years ago, she said. The signature on the secondary will, the one Melanie used to claim the entirety of your grandmother's estate, is a total mismatch. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the San Francisco winter. 5 years ago, when our grandmother was in the intensive care unit, Melanie had emerged with a document that supposedly stripped me of my 50% share in the Arts District house. She told everyone I was too unstable to handle the responsibility. I had been 27, grieving the only woman who ever truly saw me, and I was too broken to fight back. I had accepted the scrap of a bookstore job and a life of quiet isolation. But now, looking at the high-resolution scans Grace sent to my tablet, the truth was undeniable. Melanie hadn't just been cold. She had been a criminal. The signature on that document was a clumsy imitation, likely written while our grandmother was unconscious. My own mother had forged the name of a dying woman to ensure I would have nothing. This wasn't an oversight. It was a hostile takeover of my future. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrawn for years, but this was the final overdraft. This wasn't just greed. It was a felony. I realized then that Melanie and Gary didn't just want the house. They needed me to be a failure so they wouldn't have to face the ghost of what they had stolen. If I was successful, I was a threat. If I was a worthless burden, they were the heroes who saved me. But the numbers don't lie, and neither does a forensic handwriting analyst. Melanie had stolen approximately $2 million in property value and inheritance funds. With interest over 5 years, that debt had ballooned into something that could dismantle their lives permanently. Kayla, we have enough to file criminal charges for fraud and forgery, Grace continued. Her tone was clinical, mirroring my own. We can also invalidate the waiver you signed last night. Since it was based on the premise of a legal will that we can now prove was forged, the entire contract is void. You don't just own the headquarters of NovaCore. You legally own the roof over their heads. I looked out at the lights of the bay. The realization was a kill shot. There was no more path to redemption for them. They weren't just ungrateful or mean-spirited. They were criminals who had profited from my loss while mocking me for my poverty. I told Grace to prepare the formal depositions. No more family lunches. No more tough love interventions. From this moment on, we were only communicating through the court system. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming a legacy they had tried to bury under 5 years of lies. They arrived at the NovaCore headquarters at 10 a.m. sharp on December 26th. I watched them through the tinted glass of my office suite as they sat in the reception area. Gary was still wearing his expensive watch, and Abigail was clutching her designer bag, but their posture was brittle. Even now, facing total ruin, they were haughty with my staff. They barked orders for water and coffee, trying to maintain the facade of people who mattered. They didn't realize they weren't in a position of power anymore. They were in an audit. When my assistant, Sarah, finally opened the double doors to my office, they practically sprinted inside. "We need to see the chairman immediately," Melanie demanded, not even looking at the person behind the desk. "There's been a massive legal mistake involving our family property." I slowly turned my chair around. I wasn't wearing the thrift store coat anymore. I was wearing a $2,000 custom suit, and my hair was perfectly polished. The silence that followed was absolute. Abigail's designer bag hit the floor with a heavy thud. Melanie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Gary just stared at me as if I were a ghost. "Kayla," he finally whispered. "What is this? What are you doing in this office?" "I'm not doing anything, Gary," I said, my voice echoing with the cold authority of $2.8 billion. "I'm simply sitting in my office. You're the ones who requested an emergency meeting with the founder of Nova Corp." I slid the forensic handwriting analysis across the desk. "Before we discuss Abigail's failed partnership or your eviction, let's discuss the $2 million Melanie stole from me 5 years ago through a forged signature on our grandmother's will." I watched the blood drain from Melanie's face. She looked at the document and knew the game was up. Abigail began to sob, but it wasn't the sob of a sister, it was the sob of a CEO who just realized her subscription to Success had been cancelled. This was the moment I realized a truth about them, a psychological pattern I now understood perfectly. This was the peak of the illusion of power from an empty wallet. My family had focused entirely on the difference between having and being. They obsessed over having the cars, the titles, and the $1.2 million salary. But their status was just a shell, rented with money that, as it turns out, Melanie had obtained through a crime. When that money was pulled back, they didn't have any intrinsic character left to keep them standing. They had spent decades building an illusion of power from an empty wallet, and now the bill had finally come due. "Abigail," I said, "your contract with Nova Corp is officially terminated for ethical violations." "Gary, the eviction proceeds as scheduled. The Arts District House will be transferred to a new trust, the Rose Morrison Legacy Foundation. It will provide technology scholarships for girls who, like me, were told they were worthless burdens by the very people supposed to love them." "Please, Kayla," Melanie begged, her eyes red and puffy. "We're family. We made a mistake. Think about your sister's baby." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No hurt. Just the clinical peace of a closed ledger. "I already thought about it," I said. "I thought about it for 20 years while you treated me like a ghost." "Goodbye, Melanie." I stood on the rooftop of the Nova Corp building later that evening, watching the sun set over the San Francisco Bay. The fog was lifting, and for the first time, I could see clearly. I had reclaimed my grandmother's house, I had secured my legacy, and I had finally stepped out of the golden shadow of their expectations. Justice isn't always about destruction, sometimes, it's about finally becoming the person they said you could never be. Justice may come late, but it will always come to those who dare to protect their own dignity. If you found Kayla's journey meaningful, please like and share to spread this message. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next emotional journeys.